I'm going to give you a bit of a background to the presentation, talk about my teaching and research, and then look forward. I am focusing on the developmentally focused aspects of my work today. It's been a major part of what I've done, and it's a big focus now, particularly in this time of transition in my life, having come through along Piagetian and neo-Piagetian theoretical framework. I think a lot in terms of stages and transitions and what happens during those particular phases of life. So that will be the focus, but I would like to acknowledge that there have been a couple of other major influences in my work. Worked with Bill on the clinic on ability and development for a number of years, and that was a wonderfully rich experience in terms of gaining clinical experience with highly able children and their families, and with Liz on problem-based learning, doing some fabulously exotic conferences and writing. So thank you both. So my background. I am a Vancouverite, but I grew up in Victoria, and I think both of those landscapes have shaped my love of the aesthetic and my predisposition to things artistic. In revisiting early learning experiences for a current book project, I realized that writing was also a big part of my development. I remember being lost in the process, experiencing flow. That, in addition to being raised by the Queen of Grammar, as my siblings and I called my mother, and being exposed to a wealth of literature gave me an appreciation for the power of language. Also, being the eldest of 3 children probably prepared me in some way for life as a teacher, although my path to becoming a teacher was somewhat circuitous. But certainly, my teaching experience really informed my questions about children's cognitive and social development, particularly with regard to highly able learners. This was one of my first classes, grade 4, West Heights Elementary. 35 children, and was probably 20 of them with special needs. Prior to the days when, they were designated as having special needs, but I think this class taught me so much and really awakened a curiosity for, what goes on in children's minds, and just really stretched me in terms of meeting individual needs. So, this is a bit of writing I have published on teaching. The sensing that I think goes on when you work as a teacher, the things that you pick up in a very subtle fashion around the students' expressions and body language and so on, and the dynamics in the classroom. The kind of questioning that one engages in as a teacher as well. I was always very curious about how kids were thinking, why they were thinking what they were thinking, what lay behind their questions, and how they understood things. And so as an elementary teacher, I think now in looking back on that, those were questions that I really brought with me into my graduate work, and the reason that I ended up combining special education with study in developmental psychology. And these are the things I love about teaching. I really do love the complexity of it, and the capacity to see potential in students, and then, as I say, polish that and create it. And the learning that one engages in as a teacher. So, as I say, the questions that I brought into my initial graduate work really stemmed from my teaching experience since I did my master's here with Pat Arlen, actually, former head of our department. and did it within a Piagetian framework. I had, prior to leaving teaching and coming to do graduate work full-time, worked with a group of very bright children, and I had really some questions about what was going on with them in terms of stage of development. They were around 9 years old. So incredibly bright in so many ways, but still I felt there was something else going on that actually probably might be tied to maturity, because even though they were very bright, there was still that 9-year-old kind of puzzlement, when you would talk about certain abstract concepts. So that brought me into a study of giftedness and where stages of development fit with that. I then moved on to work with Robbie Case on my doctorate, and his work really built on Piaget's and took it from that notion of general stages of development into looking at the stages in a more domain-specific way. Still with some general factors that shape the form and the content of thought, but it was a very exciting time to be studying with him, because students were really investigating different areas of development and looking how they unfolded. And they went the gamut from narrative to drawing development to sight reading notation. It was quite exciting. And there was some instructional work that really formed the foundation for what many of us came to call designs for development, because the work that was being done around the way children think about things at certain ages really was found to inform instruction in very powerful ways. And I think what struck me about this work, and what subsequent students of mine told me, is that the work really resonated with our experience as teachers. As Robbie said once, if you are teaching a class of grade 1s, yes, there's many individual pathways to development in that class, but there's still something grade 1-like about them as a group. So this kind of thing encapsulated the work that was being done. So I went on to do a number of studies that looked at different domains of development and to think about what was the progression of thinking in different areas. I was sitting on the bus in Toronto once after completing my doctorate with, planning where I was going to take all this work, right? And thinking, okay, there's Howard Gardner's, at that point, 7 intelligences. I'll just work my way through those. Didn't quite get there, but I followed out some of the work that had been done with another of Ronnie's students at Oisen, looking at drawing development. So the progression of representing 3 dimensions in 2-dimensional space, and the progression in children's capability to do that. Similarly in narrative and in social understanding. And the core idea around all of this is that I and other researchers in this tradition were searching for what Robbie called central conceptual structures. So these are kind of the core concept in a domain that ties everything together. For example, he hypothesized that in mathematics it's what he called the mental number line. And once you kind of figure out how that grows and develops and use that as a guideline for designing instruction, you can see the transfer of knowledge to other related tasks in the domain. So it's kind of the glue that holds things together at different domains. And using those as a design for development to map out instructional strategies. I did this with young children in terms of their social understanding. So using this notion of understanding other people's intentions to help them construct narratives of how a problem could be solved. So using that as a way and using narrative to help them move forward. And it was successful, as other instructional work in this area has been, in really helping students to consolidate their understanding and then move forward to new understandings. The last study I did in this regard was called The Child as Psychologist. And it looked at children from ages 6 to 16, all identified in one way or another as gifted in the academic areas. And we looked at how those children understood themselves as learners. What was their learner identity? How did they understand the constructs of teaching and learning, and how did they understand knowledge? It was really an incredibly informative study to do. The logo actually was designed by one of the participants, an 11-year-old boy who had his own web design company, and who now has a phenomenal social media company in the U.S. that has 45 employees and I think 5 offices at this point in time. Started at the age of 19, so learned a lot.
Well, it looks like he actually started at 11 or before.
Well, indeed, Linda. Yeah, you could see the signs of it. And this is just as an aside, but it's a great story, I think. At 11, he wanted to be a corporate lawyer. Had great plans. It was all laid out very carefully. And I'll talk a little bit more about this project, but he has been followed up. And at the age of 19, he was interviewed about, oh, you said you wanted to be a corporate lawyer. He laughed at that and he said, oh, I've just come out of a meeting with my corporate lawyer. So yeah, so I went with the results of many interviews with kids and discussions with kids about how they like to be taught, how they themselves would teach, how they define learning, and what was happening when they were learning. Really pulled it together, and I thought perhaps there's a central conceptual structure that's actually relevant to all of that, which I called a central epistemological structure. So how kids' ways of thinking about knowledge and the way they acquire it develops over time. So at this point, I feel that I'm kind of investigating my own central conceptual structure in a way, bringing together my artistic interests and my academic interests. And I'm doing, I think, or it certainly feels this way, what Robbie Case called the merging of two files as a metaphor for development. And use this to explain how at transitional points in development, we take understandings, two separate understandings that have been developing kind of independently, and we merge them, that merging of the two files. And so this is where I feel I'm kind of at the groundwork of uniting my artistic and academic interests. I have moved into a study, which I'll talk about in a minute, on giftedness in the arts, namely opera. And also moved into arts-based methodology. So looking at the use of portraiture, narrative, and a collaboration with a documentary filmmaker, which I will also get to momentarily. So with Nancy Hermiston, who is the director of the School of Opera here at UBC, and Laurel Parsons, who's a music theorist, we're doing a study called Libretti of Learning. It is examining I want to say effect, but it's not the kind of study that looks at effects, but more an exploration of talking to opera students who have a diagnosed learning disability. Nancy has noticed over the years that she has directed the program that a number of incredibly talented young students actually struggle with aspects of their learning. There's a range of ways in which dyslexia manifests itself, dysgraphia, certainly there's ADHD. And her experience has been that opera, she thinks, in some way supports their learning in interesting ways. She thinks it's the multitasking that's involved in it, because as you can see, this is a shot from Don Giovanni, but there is so much going on that you have to attend to when you're on stage. You know, there's the costumes, there's the movement, there's the other people's parts, and you know, there's attending to the conductor without being seen to attend to the conductor. There's the lighting, the audience, even negotiating in some of these costumes is phenomenally complicated. Plus you're singing in different languages. You know, there's many things about it. So, I mean, at this point, we probably have raised a whole pile more questions. But certainly, I think what is coming out loud and clear is that there is something to this multitasking, complex task idea that really is supported in other aspects of literature on individuals who are both gifted and learning disabled. The other piece is the phenomenal passion that these young people have for what they do. I think really gives them a degree of resilience and an amazing focus to really kind of carry on, often in the face of some significant challenges. The other project I'm doing is Super Kids 2. And this is with Harry Tillis, who's a documentary filmmaker. He's on faculty at Emily Park. And we're really working with the premise that film works with personal narrative. So it really capitalizes on what Jerome Bruner has called the landscape of consciousness. And it brings new understanding to students of human development and education, to teachers, to parents, and researchers. And I think we'll eventually go in the direction of to other students as well. About 10 years ago, Harry and his producer, Rick Bierstow, made a film called Super Kids, which tracked the process of application to a program that's a collaboration between UBC, the Ministry of Education, and Vancouver School Board, located on campus, the transition program, which is designed to allow highly gifted young adolescents to bridge their elementary through to university experience. They do 2 years in the program with the intent of preparing them to then start university early. And it tracked the process of applicants, 3 applicants to that program, and also told the story of one young man who was already in the program. Not all students chose to go or were accepted to the program, so it's a very interesting examination of family and personal motivation and just the educational options. The whole process of what parents and kids go through in grade 7, trying to figure out what the heck they're going to do the following year. And I've shown this a number of times in classes, and inevitably the question was, well, what happened to these kids? You know, do you know where they are now? So Harry and I kind of put our heads together a couple of years ago, and as of last year, we're successful in getting a development grant to do work on this. And this shows 2 of the young men who were in the in the original film. Again, we're using film. This is a preliminary study trying to get the groundwork laid for a larger project that will continue to ask important questions of these young people regarding their career choices, the thought process that went into it. On the left, and it is okay for me to identify these participants since they have already been publicly in a documentary. Mendel Stulsky here, who actually ended up going to St. George's for his high school experience rather than into the transition program. You could tell in the original film he wasn't all that committed to the idea. No, I didn't quite get my portfolio ready. So, very interesting. And he has gone on to complete a degree in industrial design. And Chetan Birstow, who did graduate from the program, did an undergraduate degree here in English, and is now pursuing a second one in music, and is thinking about graduate school. So we are hoping to take this forward after we're still engaged with graduate students in analyzing hours and hours of original footage, new footage, pulling out themes, transcribing, and so on, to think about what will happen in the next phase of the project. Which brings me, some of you heard me talk about this at the retirement function, but it's really incredible because, for a number of years as I kind of thought this through, I thought, I don't know, I'm not happy with the term. And it's largely because, people sort of assume, they seem to assume that you're going to fade off into the sunset somehow. So, I was influenced by Carl Lego, with whom he's part of a writing collaborative I'm involved in. So I went to etymology and I mean, look at this. It's the act of retreating and withdrawing. And emeritus also, the roots of that, this notion of serving your time and finishing your work and your past service and bye. So, part of my mission is really around this idea of rethinking that, and I don't know that it's the word necessarily that is the problem. I think it's just that as more of us move into this phase of life, perhaps actions will speak louder than words. There's a wonderful chapter in a book on development, lifespan development, that talks about the persimmon's promise, and uses the metaphor of the persimmon tree, which does not bear its fruit until after the first frost. So, and I think it's a great time, as a person with an interest in developmental psych, it's a great time to be retiring, actually, because it's a transition that's getting some attention in the research arena. And we're really looking at the fact that those old stage models are no longer relevant. Piaget, of course, didn't even think about adult. After you were formal operational, if you ever became one, that was it. And Erickson's notion of generativity, which was, really, in his model, it was around the age of 50 to 60. So writers now are saying if we were to kind of take that model, all of those, that would be pushed forward a great deal. So we really do, I think, really need to re-examine and conceptualize what we think about this phase of life. For those of you who are interested in the neuroscience of this, and recognize I'm sort of just I'm novice in neuroscience. I'm sort of just delivering this information. But Gene Cohen, who's a psychiatrist, has written about this. He's done some really interesting work in the U.S. around the role of the arts in later life. And his work on the neuroscientific basis of this work is that in elder adulthood, there is actually more neural density. Our brains have learned more, and we have complex neural architecture. And there is lots of neurogenesis going on. He talks about wisdom equaling developmental intelligence, and really this means the optimal integration of neurological, emotional, intellectual, and psychological capacities in the mature brain. So there's more bilateral brain involvement, so our hemispheres are talking to each other more. New neuron formation in the information part of the brain is associated with a desire for novelty. There's bilateral involvement of the hippocampi that contributes to our capacity for autobiographical expression. And this involvement also helps link the neocortical thinking brain with the limbic feeling brain. And there are also changes in the amygdala that provoke positive emotions and morale. Apparently, the amygdala no longer fire rapidly in the face of emotional stimuli. So in terms of the autobiographical piece, I have been involved with this group of scholars, some from our faculty, one from SFU, one who graduated from our doctoral program in CCFI and has gone on to be faculty at CityU, in writing about teaching, and really from an autobiographical point of view, and kind of examining our own work, both our practice and our inner work as teachers. That book has been published. We are now in the process of writing one on learning, and we have plans to carry on with that, some potential topics. And as I said, the other two projects, I'm hoping to maintain some level of involvement with the opera project and Super Kids. So just a few closing thoughts. And of course, in the artistic vein, let's see if we can get this up. I'm not going to, because time is of the essence. So this, if I can send you this link if you would like to see it. But in his 70s, Matisse really went back to his roots, which came from a family of weavers, and the textile industry. He came from a town in northern France where this was really important. He kind of returned to those roots with his artistry and did the most remarkable paper cuts. They are seen as the most important works of his career. The quote I'm going to read is from Hilary Sperling's work, biography in 2 volumes, where she said in his mid-70s he felt himself approaching clarity, power, and purpose. So I think it really resonates with the work that's being done, for example, by Gene Cohen in terms of potential. So in moving forward, I would really like to continue the explorations of art, writing, and the merging of the arts with research that have been woven through my life as a teacher and a researcher. And thank you for the opportunity to present, and also for the experience